In the very early days, I guess one of the things that sort of struck me about Solomon is we had a kindred spirit. Both of us love the Lord. Although we were involved in secular music, we always ended up talking about spiritual music, or we always ended up talking about soulful singers and identifying a soulful singer as one who had come out of the church and brought some of the soul that was with them in the church to the secular world. We had similar friends. Solomon's friends were my friends. Solomon was trying to make it in the business. I was trying to make it in broadcasting. How I remember those times we would sit at Dewey's Restaurant, 48th, Babe Shivy, 48th and Spruce Street, I believe it was.
And never order any food, just eat the rolls and coffee.
And sit and talk. We didn't have money to order food.
We were at a very unique restaurant in West Philadelphia where Babe used to hold conferences, and I would sit there and write songs.
Solomon could sit, believe it or not, while he was sitting at the table, he could write. He could write a song.
I did a record called This Little Ring that I wrote, a song called This Little Ring, and Leave My Tagger Alone. The song Leave My Tagger Alone was owned by Herb Aberson. He had his own little label, and we went to New York to make a deal with him. He says, Solomon, you need to be with my ex-wife, who owned Atlantic Records. And he made a call to her. We went over to Atlantic, and we were sitting there, Babe Shivy and I, and we were looking at the pictures, Ray Charles and Big Joe Turner and Avi Joe Hunter and Ruth Brown. And you're just like, oh my God, you're in the midst of all these stars, you know. And this lady came out, she says, I'm Mrs. Beanstalk, and I have news for you because we just let Ray Charles go. So Ray's out of here. I want that picture down and out of here. So your picture may be going up there. Babe and I look at one another and say, what is this talking about? So these two guys came out. His name, he says, my name is Jerry Wexler. I'm Ray again, and you're signed.
By the time that Solomon came to Atlantic Records, at just about the time that Ray Charles was leaving in 1959, soul music was still not defined, but it was on the cusp.
Before that, they were still talking about race records. You know, there was black records and there were white records. So Atlantic, with the philosophy it had, was a new and in a lot of ways exciting record label. Because behind the scenes, they'd kind of broken the color bar.
Solomon's first record, or at least one of his first records, for Atlantic was a country and western record, just out of reach. It was a funny kind of a record for someone like Solomon to be doing. It was not a logical choice.
So far away from lips, so sweet and warm, just out of reach of my two open arms.
Grandmom's house was classic country, pop, jazz, big band, gospel of all kinds. Every Saturday we had the privilege of listening on our big Philco radio to the top 40. And they would play Bing Crosby, Frank Sinatra, Nat King Cole. And then the other fascinating thing was to listen to Gene Autry on the radio. And my grandmother would say, listen to the diction that Gene Autry is using, his phrasing. I'm back in the saddle again. He doesn't say I'm back in the saddle again. He says, I'm back in the saddle again. Make people feel that you're in that position, that you're right in the words of that song.
Love that runs away from me, dreams that just won't let me be, blues that keeps.
And yet somehow or other, that connection between country and soul, it was the same chords, but it was placing that emotionally uninhibited approach of gospel music into a genre, into country music, which for the most part was fairly restrained in its expression.
Just out of reach of my two empty arms.
Herb Jeffries, who was the first black cowboy. He was the first black artist to ever record country music, who was not being recognized. And so the disc jockeys who wanted to play my records couldn't, because there was no format for country music by a black artist. Luckily enough, we were called into Los Angeles about a year and 4 months later, and just before our contract expired for Atlantic, to meet Gene Autry. He was so kind to say to me, "I love what you did with my song. We own it. It's on our publishing company, 4-Star Music, and because you're not getting airplay, we're going to do something about that. As of next week, your record will be played." 10 days later, 9 major radio stations in the United States of America was playing Just Out of Reach every hour on the hour. And it actually forced the black stations to find a way to format Just Out of Reach.
So far away from you and all your charm.
And it just took off. And how much it took off can be seen in the success that Ray Charles had with Modern Sounds of Country in Country and Western just a couple of years later.
The record company realized if they didn't stop me, that I would continue to make country music and would be classified as a country artist. So they stopped me by bringing in an exciting young man by the name of Don Covey. And we began to write songs together, Tonight's the Night, things like that. And that was the beginning of having such a great rapport with Don.
Someone should call. Don't answer the phone. Somebody knocks on the door. Tell them we're not home. I don't want to be nobody. Oh, tonight.
Bert Burns is someone who had a brilliant career in pop music, both as a songwriter and as a producer.
He brought me a song called A Little Bit of Soap, which I didn't too much care about, so I didn't do that. Then he said, "Well, I have a great song for you that's a smash hit." And he went on, "Hang on, Snoopy, Snoopy, hang on." And I said, "I don't do dog songs." And Jerry would say, "You little arrogant son of a biscuit. This man's got hits here. You need to try to think of one of these songs." I said, "Well, I thought I was working with Don Covey." He said, "You need to work with Bert Burns. He's also a great writer, and he's working here for you." So the next week, Bert came back with a song called Cry to Me.
When your baby leaves you all alone and nobody calls you on the phone, don't you feel like a crying? Don't you feel like crying?
Solomon combined a lot of different elements in his singing. He had a rough side and he had a smooth side, and each was equally convincing. The rough side came from the gospel preaching style of Brother Joe May, the Thunderbolt of the Midwest. The sweet side, with which he crooned a good deal of the melody, came from a combination, I would say, of Ivory Joe Hunter, whom Solomon has always admired, and Sam Cooke. And the combination of these two elements created an explosive kind of a mix. And this was really what characterized Solomon's greatest songs.
And I know what the price I paid for loving someone like you.
Rockin' Robin, he had a big show in Baltimore, which we headlined for him in the Royal Theater. And he had a couple of new groups on the show. The Marvelettes was one of his artists, and there's another group called the Supremes that never performed before. And he says, "We got to do something spectacular." So he got on the radio and said, "Solomon Burke's going to be crowned king of rock and soul." And that was the gimmick to get all the people out to the theater. And we did it the first night, and everybody liked it so much, we wound up doing it for the whole week. And that became the robe and crown and throne situation.
I talked to dozens of people who were out on the road with Solomon in the 60s. The universal remembrance that everyone I've spoken to has is, first of all, what a rascal he was, and second of all, how much fun it was to be around him at all times.
That would have been all right. She loved us a B.B. King, but couldn't nobody get to her. She said, B.B. my man, I'm waiting on him to come up here and claim me. Said, tops off, it's gone.
People who toured with him talk about his entrepreneurial ways, how he would make up these sandwiches, these bologna and cheese sandwiches, and have those to sell and water to sell at the start of a tour, just as they were about to cross the Mason-Dixon lines into the South. And Solomon would do his best to persuade the other members of the troupe to buy the food that he was selling them at this point, because the cost was only going to go up. They all said, you know, forget it, we'll just eat while we're on the road. Well, they couldn't eat when they were on the road.
When you were touring and you were visiting other states, it was a segregated time. There were not a lot of four-star hotels that were allowing blacks to stay overnight in them. We did a lot of sleeping in cars.
The ability to go into restaurants was just as limited as your opportunity to stay at hotels. It was just you were dealing with a strictly Jim Crow world, a world which I think it's difficult for people today to recall, even though they may be faced with many of the same hallmarks of prejudice. They're not faced with those same physical inconveniences. As they got deeper and deeper into the South, the price of the sandwiches, the price of the water just skyrocketed.
If he could sell you soup in front of his venue and could make $1 on it, I would think he would do it.
The whole of Black America at the time was a hustle. You know, everybody was trying to make a living any way they could. You know, there weren't really any millionaires operating in that environment. You know, so in the same way as Solomon would make a couple of extra dollars on his sandwiches, you know, people were trying to make a couple of extra dollars as DJs or managers or kind of any way they could. I mean, you know, it was all part of the environment of the hustle of Black America.
I ain't gonna work on my gas farm no more. No, I ain't gonna work on my gas farm no more. Well, I'll wake up in the morning, fold my hands and pray for rain. Got a head full of ideas that's driving me insane. It's a shame the way she makes me scrub those floors.
And we were probably, I would think, the first British band that ever heard of any of his stuff, because around the same time we did Cry to Me, which was from him, Everybody Needs Somebody to Love, and one more, If You Need Me.
Solomon's influence on this whole British wave that included Van Morrison and the Rolling Stones, I think, is incalculable. He had toured England at that time. He made a tremendous impact on everybody who saw him.
Well, there was the name for a start. I mean, Black Americans had the weirdest and the strangest names: Nathaniel Mayer and the Fabulous Twilights, Solomon Burke, and the name itself generated curiosity.
In the 60s, the Rolling Stones, and everybody that was around then that was interested in soul music loved Solomon Buke. We were all listening to him, but seeing Solomon coming in there live and listening to what he could do with a song was very uplifting.
Soul singers were like almost two a penny in the mid-60s. There were dozens of them, and they came over in droves. And your typical soul singer would bounce on stage all smiles, and he'd shout, "Let me hear you say yeah," and then he'd sing "If I Had a Hammer," and then he'd look at his watch and bounce off again. Solomon was so amazingly different to that.
We went to those clubs and they were jam-packed. I mean, every night. What an incredible time. Everybody came up on the stage and jammed and played with you and sang with you. And it was just a warm, warm relationship. As he was going into the club, you know, I walked up to him and I said, "Hey, Solomon, you know, I'm Tom Jones." "Tom Jones, the singer?" I said, "Yeah, get behind me, you know, come on." So I sort of walked behind him going into the club because he had his full gear on, you know. So we became friends right then.
James Brown had worn robes. Solomon's were gold and silver and white, and he had a red, gold and silver crown on top. And then when he took the robes off, he had a black and silver suit with purple lapels. We'd never seen anything like that.